Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Walt Peretti. I'm with New York State Workers' Compensation Board in the Advocate for Business office. Today's presentation is requirements for businesses applying for government permit, license, or contracts. We did this a lot with building officials, but it's for any individual or persons that might issue or apply for any type of government contract, whether that's a food service permit, again, a building permit is either a homeowner or business, any type of state license, etc. So what is the Workers' Compensation Board? We were created in 1914 after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory that occurred in 1911. A lot of women and specifically immigrants lost their lives. We oversee the workers' compensation, disability benefits, and paid family leave insurances. We receive reports of injuries and illnesses, and we authorize payments for those injuries, and we also authorize health providers to treat workers' compensation injuries. The board has approximately 1,050 employees with offices throughout New York State, as well as hearing points. We hold hearings to adjudicate any claims. If there's any type of question as to the compensability of the claim, whether it happened on the job or whether it was work-related or not. Okay. Specifically, our office, the Advocate for Business office, led by our Advocate for Business, Anthony Tomaselli, we assist individual businesses with coverage and compliance issues. We work to educate business owners as well as government personnel on the workers' compensation system. And we regularly meet with different business associations, chambers of commerce, employer groups, et cetera, to listen to their concerns regarding the workers' compensation system. We report directly to our chairperson, Frida Foster, and we're able to bring back any concerns if we hear an underlying theme, and maybe we can make it better for businesses through regulation or sometimes legislation. Okay. So in terms of what applies when you're issuing a permit, it's Section 57 of the Workers' Compensation Law and then Section 220 of the Disability Benefits Law. And it basically says no permit, license, or contract shall be issued without proper proof of workers' compensation and disability benefits / paid family leave insurance. So that can be either show you have proof of workers' compensation, disability benefits, or you can file the CE 200, which is a certificate of attestation of exemption that show you are exempt from having New York State and/or disability benefits coverage. Some of our coverage basics. What does workers' compensation cover? It covers any type of on-the-job accident, injury, or illness. Okay, it's there to provide both medical and wage replacement. So if you were injured on the job and you're unable to go to work for a period of time, you'd be eligible for up to 2/3 of the average weekly wage in New York State. And you would never pay any type of medical, hospital charge, co-payment, testing fee, et cetera. It's an insurance that's there to protect both the employer as well as their employees. Okay. Disability benefits covers anything that happens off the job. So if you went home this evening, you're raking leaves or mowing your lawn, and you hurt yourself to the extent that you could not come into work, there'd be some benefits there for you. You must be under the care of a physician or another healthcare professional. There's only limited wage replacement. There's no medical benefits. So if you were hurt off the job, hopefully your health insurance coverage would pick up, the medical care and the fees associated with that. You have to file a claim within 30 days disabled. And the wage replacement is $170 per week for up to a maximum of 26 weeks. So it's been that rate for a very long time. Okay. Also, paid family leave insurance. That came into existence in 2018, so about 7 years now. It's there to provide job protected paid time off, whether it's a bond with a newborn child, a birth, adoption, or foster care. Care for a sick family member that has a serious health condition, or assist when a family member is deployed abroad on any type of active military duty. Okay. So who needs coverage and who doesn't need coverage? All right. So businesses with employees need coverage. All right. And that has to start on day one. So whether you're hiring somebody on a part-time basis, full-time basis, whether it's a family member, et cetera, you need to have coverage the day that individual starts working for you. Okay. If it's disability benefits, paid family leave, you have 4 weeks after the 30th day of employment. So about 2 months to get that coverage in place. Again, so there are instances, especially in issuing out-of-state permits or a building permit for an out-of-state entity, where they might be doing a project in New York State for 2-3 weeks. So they would need the workers' compensation insurance for that from the first day they had employees in New York State. But they might not require the disability insurance if they're not going to have employees for 30 days after that, 4 weeks of employment. So they would give you the workers' compensation insurance certificate to show they have the coverage there, and then they could give you the CE 200 to show you that they are exempt from disability benefits and paid family leave. Okay, so how do we an employee? Okay, it's anybody that's providing services to a for-profit business can be determined to be an employee of that business. We don't look at whether you're paying the individual or how you're paying them, whether it's a 1099, W-2, paying them on their table, et cetera. If they're providing services to your for-profit business, they can be determined to be an employee of your business. Okay, and then any compensated individuals that are providing services to a nonprofit. Okay, and with the exception of clergy or teachers in a 501c3 situation. Who's not required to carry workers' compensation insurance? In all these instances we're going to go through, these individuals or persons are not required to carry it. However, they can always get the coverage. So if you're a sole proprietor, you have no employees, maybe you just have a landscape business or you build decks and work all by yourself, you would not be required to have that coverage. If you're partners in a partnership with no employees, so everybody working for the business is a partner, and you have no other employees aside from those partners, you would be exempt from coverage. 1 or 2 person-owned corporations that have no other employees. The caveat there is if it's a 2 person-owned corporation, between the 2 of them, they each have to hold 1 office, and between the 2 of them, they have to own all the shares of stock, at least holding 1 share. If there's a 3rd officer, that individual would be considered the employee, so that business would need coverage. Okay. LLCs, if the only people compensated are members of the LLC, then they would be exempt from coverage if they had no other employees. It's basically, do you want to assume that risk? So you're a sole proprietor, you can assume that risk for yourself, or your partner, you can assume that risk of not having coverage for yourself, but you can't, assume that risk for an individual that's working for you. And again, anybody that we just described above, they do not need the coverage. But if they were injured on the job, that sole proprietor became injured to the point where he or she could not work, there would be no coverage for them, both on the medical side or any indemnity wage replacement benefits. So you want to make sure you can still get the coverage. You want to protect yourself. If you are one of those individuals, you can still have that coverage. Some of the coverage issues we come across in our office and when we're dealing with this, independent contractors and subcontractors, and we'll get into those slides a little bit later in the presentation. Family members, they are considered employees. So if your son or daughter's home from college and they're helping out in the family business, or your spouse is answering phones or doing some bookkeeping for you, technically that individual is considered an employee and you would need coverage for them. Domestic employees, okay. Borrowed employees, basically each business is covered under their FEIN number. So if you own a couple different businesses with different FEIN numbers, maybe one of those businesses has employees, the other one doesn't. You can't borrow employees from one business and have them go work for the other business for the day without having coverage. Okay, the individual or the persons are deemed to be employees of the businesses that they're providing services for. So if they're working over there at company A, and you send them over to another one of your companies, company B, to do some work, both company A and B would both need to have coverage. Okay. Also in your homeowner's policy, there's a workers' compensation rider. It covers casual employment in and around the house. So there's some limited coverage on your homeowners for workers' compensation. Leased employees. Businesses can get coverage through a PEO, professional employer organization, if they are leasing employees. So sometimes like an accounting firm, or even sometimes like builders, if they're just hiring, they'll hire through a professional employer organization. A PEO has to be licensed with the board, and they were considered employees of the leasing firm and not employees of that hiring business. Non-for-profits, if they're not compensating anybody, again, they would not need coverage. But if it's a local little league or hockey association, they have paid coaches, they would need to have coverage for those, and they would need to have a workers' compensation coverage for those individuals. Out-of-state employers working in New York State, if you're sending employees, into New York State to work, you need a New York State policy. Okay, there's a couple ways you can go about doing that, and we'll get into that later as well. Religious organizations, you're not exempt based on your religious beliefs. So the Mennonites, etc., Amish, they would need coverage, okay, unless they otherwise met one of those those exemptions we talked about, the sole proprietor, the partnerships, et cetera. Student interns, whether they're being paid or not, you still need coverage for them, okay? They're getting something of value in return. They're going to put that on a resume. Hopefully at some point it leads to, a paying job for them. So if you're hiring student interns in your office, and they were the only quote unquote employees, you would need to have a policy to cover them. Temp service agencies, sometimes in the building industry, like there's Labor Ready, labor workforce, companies like that, where they provide the workers for you. So you could otherwise be exempt. You could be that sole proprietor and just, hiring through a temp service agency. Generally, they are considered to be employees of Labor Ready or the entity that you're hiring them from. So if you were otherwise exempt as a sole proprietor, LLC, et cetera, and all you had were those employees from a temp service agency, you would not need to have coverage unless you wanted to cover yourself. And then volunteers, all right? We always say, and our compliance people say, there's no volunteers in a for-profit business. So even if you're helping a friend out on the weekend in his or her business, building decks or installing pools, et cetera, just doing that individual favor, you would need to have coverage, okay? Whether you're paying that individual or not. Okay. General contractors are liable for all workers' comp claims of any uninsured subcontractor they have. So we always recommend when we give this presentation to the building industry folks that if you are a general contractor, you either have your own policy or you insist that your subcontractors have a policy, and then they add you as a certificate holder on their workers' compensation policy. And the reason why that's important is as a certificate holder, that general contractor would get notification from the carrier if anything were to change. So if I'm that subcontractor and I don't pay my premium for the quarter, what have you, and I get canceled, my carrier would send a note to any certificate holders just letting them know, hey, Walt Peretti, we're canceling for non-payment of premium, or we're canceling him for underwriting reasons. So you always want to make sure if you are hiring subs, you make sure they get a workers' comp policy in their name and FEIN number, and they list you as a certificate holder of that policy. New York State has a Construction Industry Fair Play Act. The act determines essentially whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor, and they must meet these three criteria, okay? It also determines when a sole proprietor, partnership, or corporation will be considered a separate business entity from that contractor. And for that, there's 12 criteria. Okay. Again, they have to meet all three of these. And a lot of it is, are they free from direction and control? Okay. Are you not telling them, hey, well, I need you there at 8 a.m., and I want you to work till 5 p.m. on Monday through Fridays? Are they performing services outside the usual course of business? So if you're a general contractor hiring a roofer, okay, they're outside the usual course of business. So that roofer could be deemed to be a subcontractor. They're engaged in an independently established trade, okay, that's similar to the service that they perform. And if you're a sole proprietor, partnership, or corporation, you have to meet all these following 12 criteria. Again, you're free from that direction and control. They're not instructing you, what time to show up, when to be there, et cetera. You're not subject to cancellation when the work with the contractor ends. You continue working. You have your own tools. You have a substantial investment in the capital. Any equipment, you're bringing your own vehicle. You're not driving the general contractor's vehicle with his business name on the side or her business name on the side. You gain the profits and loss, and you gain any profits and bear any losses of that entity. You make your services available to the general public. So you're not saying, you're an installer for, Walt Peretti Contracting. You take out your own ads, you have your own business cards. Okay. You file your own income tax as an independent business. And you perform those services under your own name. Okay. You obtain and pay for any required licenses or permits under your own name. You bring your own tools to the job and any other equipment necessary to perform that job. You hire your own employees without the contractor approval, and you can fire those employees. You report their employees' wages to the IRS. You perform similar services to others. So you offer those services that you offer to other businesses and the public. And you don't represent the entity of the employees, or the entity has its own employees. A quick example on that is a while back, when you go to some of the big box stores, Home Depot, Lowe's, et cetera, they have authorized installers. So if those individuals usually have a business card that says, Walt Peretti, authorized installer of windows for Home Depot or for Lowe's. When that individual, if they get that job through a big box store or for any, for any store for that matter, they would be deemed to be an employee of Lowe's or Home Depot for that particular job. They're getting the job through Lowe's or Home Depot. They're telling them, hey, Walt Peretti lives on 205 Main Street, needs these windows installed or needs this roof put on or hot water tank or whatever it might be. So you have to represent yourself and not another entity. Out-of-state companies working in New York State, we talked about it a little bit earlier. So back in 2007, about 18 years ago, we enacted where you need to have a full New York State workers' compensation policy. And the reason why that's important is because if you're injured in New York State, you're entitled to New York State level benefits. So every state, 50 states, obviously, everybody has a different workers' compensation system and different benefit level. So we wanted to make sure if an employee was coming into New York State and performing services or work in New York State, they would be covered under and be able to collect New York benefits. There's two ways they can do that. If there's about 220 carriers licensed to write workers' compensation benefits in New York State, and if you're from Massachusetts, Connecticut, or any other state, if your carrier is also licensed to write workers' comp benefits in New York State, insurance in New York State, they can just add New York in section 3A of your policy. And that essentially says that the carrier is aware that you are sending employees into New York State, and should one of those, should one of those individuals be injured on the job, they can collect New York benefits. They are entitled to collect New York benefits. If you are insured with a company that is not licensed to write in New York State, you would have to go out and get a separate New York policy. Okay, you can either do that again through one of the larger carriers, Travelers, Hartford, et cetera, or we have the New York State Insurance Fund that would write you a policy in New York State for both workers' comp and disability benefits. The proof of workers' comp. So if somebody's coming in, whether office or they're coming in to get any type of permit, the specific form, if it's a private insurance carrier, is Form C-105.2. It's a certificate of insurance. The New York State Insurance Fund uses the U-26.3. It's essentially the same form, same fields of information. It's just a different form number. Okay, if the business is self-insured, okay, generally you'd see that with a larger corporation. A lot of the grocery chains like FedEx, et cetera, Walmart, they're all self-insured. Okay, they would submit the SI-12, and if it was a group self-insurance situation, they would submit the GSI 105.2. The certificates of insurance are available from either your licensed agent or the insurance carrier. They're the two entities that issue the certificates of insurance. If you are self-insured, you come through the New York State Workers' Comp Board, and we would issue the SI-12. Okay, and again, if you are exempt, you would fill out that Form CE-200 that proves that you don't need workers' comp and or disability benefits. We used to have the BP1, which was for homeowners to show that they were exempt from workers' compensation insurance if they were getting some type of permit to do work around their home. That's been continued as of 2018. So they would now use the CE-200. All the reasons for exemption on that BP1 have been moved over to the CE-200, which is an online form. And that CE-200 can be found at businessexpress.ny.gov. Okay. So what is the legal name of the employer and why it's important? Again, you're insured by the FEIN number. So anytime a business is applying for any type of permit, license, or contract, they have to show that they have proof of coverage, workers' compensation coverage, in their own name and FEIN number. So whatever they're asking, whatever they're applying for the permit for, that name and FEIN number has to match up on the policy. Okay. And one policy, if there's common majority ownership and that individual owns several companies, the insurance carrier can insure them all under the same policy. The name and FEIN numbers of those other companies that are insured would all be listed on that policy or on that certificate of insurance. Okay, so you want to make sure if you're issuing a permit, a building permit, et cetera, that all names match the permit applicant's name matches what's on the insurance certificate they are handing you, just the name and FEIN number. So here's a picture of that C-105.2. As you can see in that upper left box 1A, it's the legal name of the insured. You want to make sure that that field matches what they're asking you to put on that permit. Below that is that certificate holder that we talked about. That would be entity requesting proof. So it could be the city of Schenectady, Onondaga County, et cetera. And then their business telephone number that up on the right-hand box, their UIE number, their FEIN number is right there. And again, make sure that matches what's on the permit, the name of the carrier. And you want to make sure that the effective date is, if it's 2 days before the policy is going to cancel, you'd want to get a new certificate of insurance from that individual, because that policy date will be there. Again, it's below, it's approved by you'd be signed by the insurance carrier representative or their agent, dated. Okay. And then there's also a box there. They'll tell you that whether the proprietor, partners, or executive officers are included or not included. We talked about assuming that risk, so they can have that policy, but maybe that sole proprietor, that partner, they're excluding themselves from coverage. They're just covering the other employees in that business. And that's where that information would be seen. Okay, the U-26.3, which is a certificate of insurance issued by the New York State Insurance Fund. Again, in that box 1A, that first box on the left, you want to make sure that that policy holder matches what's going on in that permit, license, or contract from the government entity. You also want to make sure that, again, that policy period is within the effective date of when they're going to be working on that project. And those forms for the New York State Insurance Fund, you can get that form directly through them. You can log on to your account and print them yourselves. Or if you went through an agent with the New York State Insurance Fund, you can go to that individual and they would be able to issue that form to you. Okay. Again, the Accord form is a certificate of liability insurance. Proof of liability insurance. It's not acceptable proof of workers' comp. The only acceptable proof of workers' compensation insurance are those forms went over, the C-105.2, the U-26.3, and then those self-insured forms. The self-insured forms are a little bit more rare, so you probably won't see those a lot, but it's always good to know that they are there. If like a Bass Pro Shops was coming in and building a Bass Pro Shop in your town or something, they could very well be self-insured, or UPS or Amazon was going to build a warehouse. They're more than likely self-insured, and they would have that SI-12 through the board or GSI 105.2. But again, you can't accept the Accord form as proof of workers' comp. It's only the certificates of insurance. Okay. Here's the web page for the CE 200 request. Okay. It's an online application. You can either go to that businessexpress.ny.gov, or you can click right through our website and it'll bring you to that page and you can access it. It's important to note that with the CE 200, they are by permit. So if you have a local builder or fence installer, every time that individual applies for a permit, they need to submit a new CE 200, okay, because it's permit specific. With the certificates of insurance, if the individual is insured, whether the state fund or a private insurance carrier like the Hartford or Travelers, we tell the building departments, or we tell the government personnel that they can accept one, and then if they come in the next week for another permit, they can still use that same certificate, okay? But the CE 200, you have to collect one every time that you're issuing a permit to that individual. Okay. And basically the applicant is certifying that the legal entity is not required to retain coverage, okay, for a particular reason. But again, anytime they apply for one, a new CE 200 is going to be required for that permit. The certificate of attestation for exemption, it looks pretty much like an insurance certificate. It has the applicant's name, what they're applying for in this instance. It's a City of Albany building permit. And then it'll list the reason they checked or they chose why they are exempt, okay? Whether they're a sole proprietor, LLC, et cetera, with no active employees. And the big difference with whether you're issuing a permit or it's not a permit type of situation, if you're using subcontractors, generally you need to have coverage, okay? So if that individual is sole proprietor, but he lists that he's having subcontractors, unless they choose that Construction Industry Fair Play Act, it's important to know that they would need the coverage unless they were exempt under Construction Industry Fair Play Act. And again, you want to make sure that form is signed and dated. The applicant was signed and dated. It's an online application. It takes 6 to 8 minutes to fill it out. Then you get a link to the actual form. You print it. The applicant prints it. They would sign and date it, and then hand it in to go with their request for that permit. Okay. disability benefits. For both the private insurance carriers as well as the New York State Insurance Fund, they use the same certificate of insurance form. It's the DB 120.1. And then if they were insured by self-insurance, it's a DB 155. Again, that form would be issued to the New York State Workers' Compensation Board, our self-insurance office. So they would contact them if they needed that. And then if they were exempt, again, it's that CE 200. Okay. The DB 120.1. Again, that first box 1A would have the legal name. You'd want to check and make sure that matches what's going on that permit. And then box 2 is the name and address of the entity that's requesting it. So that municipality or government agency that's requesting it. And they can, again, obtain those forms, whether through their licensed insurance or their insurance carrier. If you're insured and you're having trouble getting that form, the insurance agent or carrier can contact our office. We have a separate mailbox for that. It's certificates@wcb.ny.gov, and we'll send them a blank copy of the form, and then they can fill it out. But we cannot issue the form directly to the insured, only through a licensed agent or the insurance carrier. Okay. Some of the non-compliance penalties for workers' compensation, if you're found you needed coverage, you didn't have coverage, it's up to $2,000 for every 10 days of non-compliance, comes out to approximately $72,000 a year. Up to 5 uninsured employees is a misdemeanor, subject to a $5,000 penalty. More than 5 can be a felony, subject to a $50,000 penalty. A large part of what our office does, the Advocate for Business office, is we work to mitigate these penalties as best we can. So if you're in a situation where you receive some type of letter from us, penalty letter, you can reach out directly to our office, and we'll work with you. First, you have to come into compliance. So if you still have employees and you need coverage, you go out and get a policy. The best thing to do is you send us a copy of that policy, and then we will, base that fine off of any premium you paid. So we're not going to charge a small business $2,000 if they didn't have coverage for 12, 15 days, if their annual premium is $1,100. And misclassification is the same as being uninsured. So when you're reporting that payroll to your insurance carrier, if you're misclassifying employees in terms of what type of job they're doing, that is the same thing as being uninsured, and you can be subject to those fines above. Okay. We also have the debarment list, which is section 141B of the workers' comp law. So if you're found to not have coverage and you needed to have coverage, you're barred from bidding on any type of public work contract, subcontract with New York State or any municipal entity in the state. That ban is for a 1-year period from the date of that penalty. So you want to make sure that, if you're one that you're remaining in compliance, you have that policy with no lapses in coverage. Otherwise, if you're found to have needed coverage and not have it, you'll be banned from getting any type of public work contract. And that extends to any type of permit as well. So if you need a permit to operate, you would be barred from that for a 1-year period. And the ban is 5 years for any type of felony conviction. Okay. Some other non-compliance penalties, stop work orders. If our investigators are out in the field and they find a business that has employees and they can't prove that they have coverage, they can issue a stop work order. Okay, again, you'd be barred from bidding on any type of public works project. And also importantly, the following individuals or persons are personally liable for any claims that are incurred while they're uninsured. Okay, whether that's a sole proprietor, partner, president, secretary, treasurer. And we always say workers' comp pierces that corporate veil. So, those individuals are responsible financially should anything happen where they had an uninsured claim and they didn't have coverage. Okay, so they would be on the hook for that, regardless of whether they were an LLC, et cetera, or they declared bankruptcy. A quick screenshot of our website. There's some good features on here. You can go right on the bottom, that magnifying glass, does employer have coverage? If you wanted to check if somebody's applying for that permit and you want to do a double check, you can go on there. If you know the individual's name or whatever they want on the permit, their business name, you can go on there and check and see if they have coverage. If you're hiring somebody, to remodel your kitchen and they say they have coverage and you want to, double check that coverage, you can go there as well. Here's the employer coverage screen. There's also a whistleblower form you can go for. But on the bottom, if you hit that green button, search for employer coverage, it'll bring you up to this screen. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. This is the employer whistleblower form. It's a CE 150 RF. It can be an anonymous form. You don't have to put in, your name and information if you do not want to, but it's going to send that submission right to the proper district, and our investigators will look at that if you wanted to, tell on somebody, so to speak, if they were issuing a CE 200, but you didn't think they were exempt, they had employees working, et cetera. Okay. Here's that employer coverage search screen. This is Proctor. We put in Proctor's Art Center, which is a local theater in downtown Schenectady. If you had the name of the business, that would come, anybody named that business would come up, can click on the Schenectady one. Okay. And then it'll show you their coverage. The one you want to pay attention is the effective date. There's no end date there. So their policy is in place, 7/1/2024. Generally workers' comp policies are written for a 1-year time period. So that coverage would end technically a couple of weeks ago, 7/1/2025 or 6/30/2025. But I'm sure they renewed it, as they do have employees. And yet that's the screen you get, and you can check, anybody you want, as long as you know the business name. You don't have to have their tax ID number or anything like that. Okay. When an individual is filing that workers' comp, you want to make sure that they only submit the approved form. So whether that's the CE 200 or those insurance certificates, the C105.2 or the U26.3 or the SI 12. And it's simple as make sure the legal name on the approved form matches the legal name on the permit, license, or contract. And then make sure that FEIN number, their tax ID number, or even their social security number, if they're a sole proprietor, matches that of which is going on that permit, license, or contract that they're applying for. Okay. If you want to follow the board, we have social media channels, X, formerly Twitter, Facebook page, Instagram. We have a YouTube channel where this and as well as other presentations are available. You can look at our LinkedIn page. Or you can get notifications via email. You go on there and you can choose whether you want stuff that relates to employers or injured workers, insurance carriers, et cetera. You can choose what notifications you want to receive information on via email, so that we're not filling up your inbox too much. Our office, the Office for Advocate Business, we're a smaller office. There's only about 5 of us. And we're staffed. Somebody who's going to pick up the phone between business hours, 8 and 4:30. Any questions or you need help or you have any concerns, maybe received a penalty letter from us, or just a general inquiry letter from us, you can always feel free to give us a call, 518-486-3331. You can email us at advocateforbusiness@wcb.ny.gov. We'll get back to you usually within that business day, if not the very next day, if it came in, after hours, et cetera. And then we have our portion of the website, wcb.ny.gov/AFB. There's more information there for employers and businesses that will give you assistance. Thanks for joining us today. If you do have any type of questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have more than enough time to get to all of them. So I'll take a quick break here and we'll answer any questions that you might have. So the question came in, is the Accord form or the Accord 25 good for liability? Yes, it's proof of, that's your proof of liability insurance. The board is not involved in that, but I know a lot of municipalities require some type of liability policy when they're issuing any type of permit, but that's what would go on there. There is a section for workers' comp on that form, but again, the Accord form is not acceptable proof of workers' comp. So in addition to any liability requirements, insurance requirements that your municipality may have, they would still need to submit either the certificate or the certificate of attestation for exemption at CE 200. Somebody asked a question, when did we stop using the BP1? That was back in 2018. Excuse me. We always get that question. We used to do this presentation a lot throughout New York State. We would always get that. And as soon as the slide went up that said it's no longer effective, I think 1/1/18 or 11/1/2018, everybody would start scribbling notes or calling back to their office. But no, that form has not been acceptable for 7 years now. So that's something you don't want to if they're applying for any type of permit, again, it's just those certificates of insurance or that exemption form, not the Accord form or not the BP1. So the question came in, if a homeowner or property owner files for a building permit and hires some contractor hire subcontractors, who should the information be in? It's always going to be in the entity that is applying for the permit. Okay, so the subcontractor, the only usage of the CE 200 is in the issuance of any type of permit, license, or contract from a government entity in New York State. So it's a subcontractor can't give that CE 200 to a general contractor or to a hiring business to show that they're exempt. It only holds water when you're applying for a permit. And again, if the individual that is applying for a permit, they would show the CE 200 in their name and FEIN number. They wouldn't give you a CE 200 from a subcontractor. It's up to the hiring business to get the insurance documentation from their subcontractors. Okay, as a town official, whether you're a code official or any other type of government personnel, you want to just concern yourself with the entity that you're issuing that permit to. So whether they're using subcontractors, that's under their responsibility. But as the official building official, government personnel issuing that permit, you want to make sure that the insurance documentation or the CE 200 is in the name and FEIN number of the entity that you're issuing the permit to, and not their subcontractors. Same thing if a homeowner comes in and the homeowner is applying for that permit, you want to make sure that the insurance information they give you is in the homeowner's name if that's what's going on the permit. Or if they're giving you CE 200, it's in the name of the homeowner if he or she is applying for the permit, not that subcontractor. So somebody asked the question, is there any way to check if the CE 200 is valid? There's not any way to check per se, but as a building official or government personnel, you don't have to really worry. If you want to make sure that that name on that CE 200 and that FEIN number matches what's going on that building permit or license or contract that you're issuing, you're not liable. The person that fills out that CE 200, the last box they check is, under penalty of perjury, the above, information I filled out is truthful, et cetera. You can never get in trouble for accepting that if it's fraudulent per se. You would just want to make sure that they match up that the FEIN number as well as the name. And you can also report that to the Inspector General's office if you think if you think it was issued fraudulently. But as the building official or the government personnel, we're never going to hold you responsible for accepting a fraudulent. And they do go back to, like, our compliance people can see those CE 200s, and there are checks and balances behind the scenes. If they're saying that they're building, a $500,000 house and they're doing it all by themselves, that'll kick out to our investigators, and they would probably either make a phone call or make a site visit based on that. So there are some checks and balances behind the system, and that's why it's important that you get a new CE 200 for each building permit that you're issuing. So we have a record of where that job site is and where the work is taking place, et cetera. Yeah, so the question came in, what are the penalties for the municipality if they're not collecting this documentation? I mean, if you have work going on in your town, city, village, et cetera, that does not have a building permit, generally the building inspector or the codes official has the ability to issue a stop work order, and stop the job from going on. If you think there's something going on where somebody gave you a CE 200 and, you drive by on your way home from work and they have 12 people on the roof or what have you, you can always call our office and we'll take down that information. We'll get it. And we have investigators throughout New York State. You can call the Inspector General's office. They as well have investigators, but feel free to reach out to us either by phone or email, and we will get that, through the proper channels and hopefully, get somebody to follow up on it. So the question came in, what are the rules for the Amish/Mennonites for workers' comp? Again, religious exemption, there's no such thing as a religious exemption. So unless they met one of those exemptions we discussed, whether it's sole proprietor, partnership, LLC, one or two person owned corporation, et cetera, they would need to have coverage. They can't have any type of letter from their church to make them exempt. they would need to have coverage. I know, that some of the Amish people had formed an LLC and made everybody a member of that LLC who was doing the work. So they were, they were exempt and they were allowed to fill out the CE 200, but you'd want to collect the same exact information from those groups that you would from the general public. So whether it's a CE 200 or that certificate of insurance, C 105.2 or U 26.3, they would be required to submit the same exact information, whether they're exempt or they have proof of coverage. There's no difference. They can't provide any type of letter. You can't waive your rights to workers' comp or say, I don't believe in it for any particular reason or religious reason. You still need to have that coverage if you have employees, working. Thanks for joining us today. And if you have a question down the road, again, you have our number there. It's 518-486-3331, or our email address, advocatebusiness@wcb.ny.gov. We'll be happy to, if you need something in writing, respond to you via email or answer any type of phone inquiry that you might have. Again, this presentation will be available. It's been recorded. It's going to be on our YouTube channel. And if you want a copy of that, you can email us as well, and we will send you a copy of the slide deck. But again, thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and enjoy the rest of your day.